July 15, 1943. The waters surrounding the Solomon Islands churned beneath the hull of the USS O'Bannon, a Fletcher-class destroyer patrolling the edge of what sailors had come to call the slot. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Wilkinson stood on the bridge, scanning the horizon with his binoculars as sheets of rain drifted across the sea like translucent curtains. The ship's radar operator had reported strange inconsistencies in the readings for the past 3 nights, phantom blips that appeared and vanished without explanation. What no one aboard could have imagined was that these anomalies would soon lead to a discovery that would change the course of the Pacific War. A discovery that would begin with a young radio man who was explicitly told never to modify his equipment. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how one sailor's unauthorized experimentation with radar technology created a capability the Japanese never saw coming, literally, and how this forbidden modification would transform the balance of power in the Pacific theater, saving countless Allied lives while revealing how innovation often comes not from the top brass, but from those with their hands on the equipment. 23-year-old radio man second-class Thomas Hartley had never planned to join the Navy. The son of a radio repair shop owner from Allentown, Pennsylvania, Hartley had spent his youth disassembling and reassembling any electronic device he could get his hands on. His father, William Hartley, had served in the Great War and returned with a fascination for the emerging field of wireless communication. The family shop, Hartley's Radio and Repair, became a fixture in the community, and young Thomas absorbed technical knowledge like a sponge. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Thomas had been halfway through his electrical engineering degree at Lehigh University. "I remember that day clear as crystal," Thomas would later write in a letter to his parents. "Professor Keller walked into the lecture hall and told us the Japanese had bombed our boys at Pearl. The next morning, I was standing in line at the recruitment office." Thomas's technical aptitude quickly became apparent during his naval training at Great Lakes Naval Station. While other recruits struggled with the basics of radio operation, Thomas was already suggesting modifications to improve signal clarity. His instructors were torn between admiration for his skills and frustration at his constant tinkering. "Hartley, the equipment is calibrated precisely as the Navy wants it," Chief Petty Officer Marcus Donovan had told him during training. "Your job is to operate it according to protocol, not reinvent it. Keep your experiments for after the war." By early 1943, radio man Hartley found himself assigned to the USS O'Bannon, operating one of the Navy's newest radar systems, the SG Surface Search Radar. The system was revolutionary for its time, capable of detecting surface vessels at ranges up to 15 nautical miles under ideal conditions. But ideal conditions were rare in the Pacific, where tropical storms, equipment overheating, and maintenance challenges were constant companions. Aboard the Japanese destroyer Yukikaze, Commander Kiyoshi Kikawa maintained a reputation for tactical brilliance that had earned him the nickname, the Ghost of the Solomon Sea, among Allied intelligence officers. The Yukikaze was one of the Imperial Japanese Navy's most successful destroyers, having survived numerous engagements that had claimed sister ships. Kikawa's ability to appear where least expected and vanish before American forces could respond had become legendary. "We move like the shadow of a cloud across the water," Kikawa often told his officers. "By the time the Americans adjust their binoculars, we are already elsewhere." What Kikawa did not realize was that his tactical advantage was about to evaporate because of one American sailor's forbidden tinkering. The USS O'Bannon had been assigned to Task Force 21, conducting night patrols to intercept Japanese supply ships attempting to resupply their forces on Guadalcanal and other contested islands. These Tokyo Express runs had become a critical vulnerability for Allied operations, as Japanese reinforcements continued to reach the battlefield despite American air superiority during daylight hours. The challenge for American forces was simple, but frustratingly difficult to overcome. Japanese ships would approach under cover of darkness, quickly offload troops and supplies, and withdraw before dawn brought American aircraft. The radar systems aboard American vessels were supposed to defeat this tactic, But the Japanese had become adept at using the island's mountainous profiles to mask their approach. Lieutenant William Harris, the O'Bannon's executive officer, had gathered the ship's department heads for a briefing on July 12th. "Gentlemen, in the past month, we've had 3 Japanese supply convoys slip past our patrol line. Intelligence believes they're using some kind of detection system to identify our radar emissions. When they sense we're scanning, they go quiet and hug the coastlines. Admiral Halsey is not pleased, to put it mildly." Chief Engineer Lieutenant Paul Robertson leaned forward. "What about turning off our radar and operating purely on visual? Moonless nights are challenging, but our lookouts are sharp." "That's a last resort," Harris replied. "Without radar, we're half blind. There has to be a way to use our technology without telegraphing our presence." At the back of the wardroom, Thomas Hartley listened intently. Though not invited to the officers' meeting, he had been delivering updated weather reports when the discussion began. No one had noticed him standing by the doorway, report in hand. That night, alone in the cramped radar room, Hartley stared at the SG radar system's components with a contemplative frown. The standard operating procedure called for regular sweeping signals at a fixed frequency and power. This consistency made the system reliable, but also predictable. "What if that's exactly the problem?" Hartley muttered to himself. "We're broadcasting 'Here I am' with every sweep." Radar technology in 1943 was still in its relative infancy, especially when deployed in combat conditions. The basic principle involved transmitting radio waves that would bounce off solid objects and return to the receiver, with the time delay indicating distance. But the system had limitations. Rain, waves, and islands all created returns that could confuse operators. Moreover, the transmitted signal itself could be detected by a properly equipped enemy, essentially announcing the presence of the radar-equipped vessel. The Japanese Navy, while initially behind in radar technology, had developed relatively sophisticated radio detection equipment that could alert them when they were being scanned by American radar. This allowed them to determine when Allied ships were in the vicinity and take evasive action. Hartley's insight was born of his pre-war experiments in his father's shop. Radio waves could be modified in ways that might confuse detection equipment by varying power, changing frequency slightly, or altering the pulse pattern. These modifications wouldn't necessarily reduce the radar's effectiveness, but might make its emissions harder to characterize as American radar. For 3 nights, Hartley conducted small experiments during his midnight to 4 a.m. watch. The radar room was relatively isolated, and the late-night hours meant minimal supervision. He began by subtly adjusting the power output during sweeps, higher power when scanning sectors where Japanese ships were unlikely to be, lower power when scanning the most probable approach vectors. On July 14th, during a particularly quiet watch, Hartley made a more significant modification. Using spare components he had accumulated through trades with the electrician's mates, he constructed a small variable resistor circuit that could be quickly connected or disconnected from the radar's transmission system. "Just a slight modification," he whispered to himself as he soldered the final connection. "Nothing that violates protocol too severely." His rationalization was technical but sound. By varying the power output in an irregular pattern rather than a consistent one, Japanese detection equipment might register the emissions as random radio noise rather than the signature of an SG radar system. In theory, this would allow the O'Bannon to continue radar operations without announcing its presence. The circuit was crude by laboratory standards, but ingenious in its simplicity. A small dial allowed Hartley to introduce controlled variability to the radar's emissions. The modification could be removed in seconds if an inspection was ordered. What Hartley didn't realize was that his unauthorized modification was about to be tested in combat far sooner than he anticipated. July 15th dawned grey and rainy. The O'Bannon had been on patrol for 18 hours, moving slowly through the channel between Kolombangara and New Georgia. Intelligence reports indicated a Japanese resupply mission was likely that night, attempting to deliver reinforcements to their beleaguered garrison at Vila Plantation. At 1600 hours, Captain Wilkinson ordered battle stations as the ship positioned itself for night operations. In the radar room, Thomas Hartley took his position, his unauthorized modification hidden beneath a maintenance log, Maintain continuous sweeps, ordered Lieutenant Harris over the ship's communication system. Report any contacts immediately. Hartley acknowledged the order while surreptitiously activating his modification. As the radar began its sweep, he subtly adjusted the power output, creating an irregular pattern of emissions. Aboard the Yukikaze, leading a convoy of 3 transport ships and another destroyer, Commander Kikawa studied the chart table. The planned route would bring them within 12 nautical miles of the likely American patrol zones, but historical patterns suggested the Americans would be watching the eastern approaches, not the narrow channel his ships would use. Radio detection reports no American radar emissions in our sector, reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Toshiro Miyazaki. They appear to be concentrating their patrols farther east tonight. Kikawa nodded with satisfaction. As expected, their predictability is our advantage. We proceed as planned. Maintain radio silence and minimum lighting. At 21:17, as darkness enveloped the Solomon Sea, Hartley noticed a faint return on his radar screen. At the extreme range of detection, approximately 14 nautical miles, something was moving toward the channel. Possible contact, bearing 275, range 14 miles, course 135, he reported. Signal is faint, but consistent, with multiple vessels. On the bridge, Captain Wilkinson studied the reported position on the chart. That's unusual. They're coming in from the northwest rather than the northeast. Are we certain of the contact? Contact is intermittent, sir, Hartley replied, carefully adjusting his modification to vary the radar's emission pattern, but the movement is consistent with a small convoy. Wilkinson made a quick decision. Helm, set course 270, all ahead 2/3. We'll investigate but maintain distance until we confirm. As the O'Bannon altered course, Hartley continued monitoring the contacts. What he observed was remarkable. The contacts remained visible on his modified radar, but the Japanese ships showed no signs of detecting the American vessel. Typically, Japanese ships would alter course or speed upon realizing they were being tracked by radar. They don't know we can see them, Hartley whispered to himself in astonishment. Aboard the Yukikaze, Commander Kikawa maintained his course, confident in the intelligence that had served him so well in previous operations. The radio detection equipment showed no consistent American radar emissions in the vicinity. All indicators suggest we remain undetected, Lieutenant Miyazaki reported. No radar emissions detected within operational range. The Japanese convoy continued toward its destination, unaware that the USS O'Bannon was now paralleling their course at a distance of 12 nautical miles, tracking them continuously. On the O'Bannon's bridge, Captain Wilkinson was making rapid tactical calculations. They don't appear to be taking evasive action. Either they're supremely confident, or they don't realize we're tracking them. Lieutenant Harris studied the plot board where the radar contacts were being marked. This is unprecedented, sir. Usually they scatter the moment our radar locks on. Wilkinson made a decisive command. Signal task group, coordinates for Japanese convoy located. We will shadow and prepare to engage at optimal interception point near Kolombangara. Within 30 minutes, 2 more American destroyers, the USS Nicholas and USS Taylor, were en route to create a 3-pronged attack position. The trap was being set, and remarkably, the Japanese convoy continued on its course, apparently oblivious to the American presence. In the radar room, Hartley maintained his modified radar operation, periodically adjusting the variable resistor to create an ever-changing emission pattern. The Japanese ships remained clearly visible on his screen, while their behavior suggested they remained unaware of being tracked. At 22:45, with the Japanese convoy now 8 nautical miles from the American force, Captain Wilkinson ordered final battle preparations. The O'Bannon's 5-inch guns were manned and ready. Torpedo tubes were prepared, and the crew was at full battle stations. We'll initiate with torpedoes at 6,000 yards, Wilkinson informed his officers, followed immediately by gun engagement. The Nicholas and Taylor will attack from the port and starboard quadrants, respectively. The American destroyers moved into position with practiced precision, maintaining radar contact without apparently alerting the Japanese to their presence. It was a tactical situation that would have been impossible just hours earlier. At 23:22, the order was given, "Fire torpedoes," The O'Bannon launched a spread of 5 torpedoes toward the Japanese convoy. Minutes later, the Nicholas and Taylor added their own torpedo attacks from different angles. The Japanese had sailed directly into a perfectly coordinated trap. The first explosion illuminated the night sky as a torpedo struck the lead transport ship. Moments later, multiple detonations rippled through the Japanese formation as more torpedoes found their marks. Commander Kikawa, stunned by the sudden attack, ordered immediate evasive action. "How were we not warned of their approach?" he demanded, as the Yukikaze heeled hard to starboard, narrowly avoiding a torpedo that passed just meters from its hull. "No radar emissions were detected, Commander," Lieutenant Miyazaki responded, his voice reflecting his confusion. "The detection equipment shows no consistent American radar signature." The battle that ensued was devastatingly one-sided. The American destroyers, maintaining perfect tracking of the Japanese vessels through Hartley's modified radar, coordinated their gun attacks with unprecedented accuracy. By 2350, 2 transport ships had been sunk, and a third was burning from stem to stern. The Yukikaze and the second Japanese destroyer, the Kawakaze, fought valiantly but were outmaneuvered at every turn. The American ships seemed to anticipate their every move, maintaining perfect fire solutions despite the darkness and periodic rain squalls. At 01:15 on July 16th, the engagement concluded. The Japanese transport ships had been destroyed, the Kawakaze was sinking, and the Yukikaze, though damaged, managed to escape into the night. The Tokyo Express delivery had been completely thwarted with minimal damage to the American vessels. As the O'Bannon secured from battle stations, Captain Wilkinson called for the radar operator who had maintained such exceptional tracking throughout the engagement. "Radioman Hartley," Wilkinson said when Thomas reported to the bridge, "your radar tracking tonight was the finest I've witnessed in this campaign. The Japanese never seem to detect our emissions. How do you account for this success when previous engagements have been so different?" Hartley hesitated, knowing the moment of truth had arrived. Naval regulations strictly prohibited unauthorized modifications to equipment, particularly critical systems like radar. Yet the night's success spoke for itself. "Sir, I believe I should show you rather than explain," he finally replied. "If you'll accompany me to the radar room, I can demonstrate exactly what made the difference." In the cramped confines of the radar room, Hartley revealed his modification, explaining the theory behind the variable emission pattern and demonstrating how it worked in practice. "By constantly varying the power and slightly shifting our frequency characteristics, we appear as random radio noise rather than a consistent radar signature," he explained. "Japanese detection equipment is calibrated to recognize standard American radar patterns. When we don't maintain that pattern, they simply don't recognize what they're detecting." Instead of the reprimand Hartley expected, Captain Wilkinson studied the modification with growing interest. "How long have you been running this modification, Hartley?" "3 nights, sir. I've been testing it during my watch shifts." Wilkinson looked at his executive officer. "And the phantom contacts we've been getting? The ones that appeared inconsistent?" Lieutenant Harris nodded slowly. "They weren't phantoms at all. They were actual contacts that didn't take evasive action because they didn't know we were tracking them." Captain Wilkinson made an immediate decision. "Hartley, I want this modification documented immediately. We'll forward the specifications to Task Force Command with my highest recommendation." What had begun as an unauthorized experiment by a junior radioman would, within weeks, become standard procedure across the Pacific Fleet. Hartley's forbidden modification was refined by Navy engineers and implemented throughout the theater, dramatically reducing the effectiveness of Japanese radio detection equipment. The impact was immediate and significant. Throughout August and September 1943, Japanese supply convoys suffered unprecedented losses as their captains found themselves under attack without warning. The tactical advantage of night operations, which had been crucial to Japanese resupply efforts, evaporated almost overnight. Vice Admiral William Halsey, commander of the South Pacific Area and South Pacific Force, recognized the strategic importance of what became known as emission variation technique. In a classified memorandum to fleet commanders dated August 23, 1943, he wrote, "The implementation of radar emission variation has provided our forces with an unprecedented tactical advantage. Japanese forces now operate under the constant threat of detection without reciprocal awareness. This technological edge must be exploited aggressively and protected as a classified capability of the highest order." In Tokyo, the Imperial Japanese Navy's Technical Bureau struggled to understand the sudden change in American radar capabilities. Reports from surviving vessels consistently noted the absence of detectable radar emissions prior to engagement, yet the precision of American attacks suggested perfect radar tracking. Admiral Minichi Koga, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet following Admiral Yamamoto's death, convened a technical conference in early September to address the issue. "We face a significant technical challenge that is affecting our naval operations throughout the Solomon Islands and beyond," he told the assembled officers and engineers. "Either American forces have developed a new detection system that operates without conventional radar emissions, or they have found a way to mask those emissions from our detection equipment." Japanese naval engineers proposed several theories, from new infrared detection systems to advanced sonar capabilities, but none accurately identified the simple yet ingenious modification that had neutralized their detection capabilities. By October 1943, Japanese naval operations had been forced to adapt. Without reliable detection of American radar, night operations became substantially more dangerous. Commander Kikawa, one of the few senior officers to survive repeated engagements during this period, advocated for a complete revision of supply tactics. "We can no longer rely on darkness for concealment," he argued in a report to naval headquarters. "American forces track us with perfect precision, regardless of visual conditions. We must implement a convoy system with substantial escort forces rather than rapid individual transits." This shift in Japanese tactical doctrine represented a significant victory for Allied forces. The increased resource requirements for Japanese supply operations strained their already overextended naval forces, accelerating the deterioration of their position throughout the Pacific. For Thomas Hartley, the aftermath of his innovation brought unexpected recognition. Promoted to Radioman First Class and awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for his contribution to naval operations, he was eventually assigned to the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C., where he joined a team developing advanced radar countermeasures. "The most effective innovations often come from the operators themselves," noted Captain Louis McKay, director of the laboratory's radar division in Hartley's performance evaluation. Hartley's practical experience combined with his technical intuition represents the kind of thinking we need to maintain our technological edge. The significance of the forbidden radar trick extended far beyond its immediate tactical impact. It represented a fundamental shift in the electronic warfare landscape of World War II, demonstrating how simple modifications could dramatically alter the effectiveness of existing technology. In the broader context of the Pacific War, the ability to track Japanese ships without alerting them to American presence accelerated the deterioration of Japan's maritime supply network. Islands that had been regularly resupplied now found themselves isolated as convoy after convoy fell victim to American forces that seemed to appear from nowhere. Lieutenant Commander James Fitzgerald, an intelligence officer who analyzed the impact of Hartley's innovation, would later write, "The modification of radar emissions represented a turning point in the electronic aspect of the Pacific War. Prior to this development, radar operations had been conducted according to rigid protocols that prioritized consistency and reliability." Hartley's insight that variability could be a virtue rather than a flaw challenged conventional thinking about electronic warfare. The human impact of the innovation was perhaps most poignantly illustrated in the reduced casualties among American naval personnel. Prior to the implementation of variable emission techniques, Japanese forces frequently detected American radar and prepared for engagement, resulting in higher casualty rates when battles occurred. After the technique became standard, American forces increasingly achieved tactical surprise, resulting in shorter engagements with fewer American losses. Commander David Ross of the destroyer USS Fletcher writing in his after-action report following a successful engagement near Bougainville in November 1943, noted, "Our ability to approach and engage enemy vessels without prior detection has fundamentally altered the tactical equation. Where previously we might expect determined resistance from alerted enemies, we now frequently achieve complete surprise. The psychological impact on Japanese forces appears significant, as they no longer operate with the confidence that they will detect our approach." For the sailors who operated the modified radar systems, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing they were now the hunters rather than the hunted. Radar technician Robert Collins of the cruiser USS Nashville expressed this sentiment in a letter home. "Our radar gives us eyes in the darkness, and now the Japanese don't even know we're looking. They sail along thinking they're invisible at night, and then our shells start falling. It's changed everything about how we fight." By early 1944, the Japanese had begun to develop countermeasures to the variable emission technique, but by then, the strategic situation in the Pacific had shifted decisively. American industrial capacity was delivering new ships, aircraft, and equipment at a rate Japan could not match, while Japanese merchant shipping and naval vessels were being sunk faster than they could be replaced. The story of Thomas Hartley and his forbidden radar trick might have remained a classified footnote in naval history had it not been for a congressional investigation into naval innovation in 1947. As part of a broader examination of how technical advances had contributed to the Allied victory, Hartley was called to testify before a subcommittee of the House Naval Affairs Committee. Representative William Callahan of Massachusetts, himself a former naval officer, asked Hartley directly, "Were you aware that modifying equipment without authorization was against regulations when you implemented your radar variation technique?" Hartley's response was characteristically straightforward. "Yes, sir, I was aware, but I believed the potential tactical advantage outweighed the regulatory concerns. Sometimes winning requires coloring outside the lines." His candor earned appreciative chuckles from the committee members, many of whom had served in various capacities during the war, and understood the value of practical innovation under combat conditions. The legacy of Hartley's innovation extended beyond World War II into the Cold War era, where the principles of emission control and variable radar techniques became fundamental aspects of naval electronic warfare doctrine. Modern naval vessels employ sophisticated versions of the same basic concept, varying their electronic emissions to confuse enemy detection systems while maintaining effective sensor operations. For Commander Kikawa, the experience led to a post-war career that few could have predicted. After Japan's surrender in 1945, Kikawa was among the naval officers interviewed by American technical intelligence teams, seeking to understand Japanese naval capabilities and experiences. His detailed descriptions of the sudden change in American radar detectability helped complete the historical record of this technological turning point. In a moment of historical irony, Kikawa and Hartley actually met in 1956 during an international naval technology conference in San Diego. The former adversaries, now allies in the emerging Cold War framework, compared notes on their wartime experiences. "You made my life exceptionally difficult, you know," Kikawa reportedly told Hartley during their conversation. "One day we could detect American radar from 20 miles away, and the next, your ships were firing on us before we knew you were there." Hartley's response reflected the perspective that came with years of reflection. "War drives innovation, like nothing else. What began as a simple modification meant to protect my shipmates became something much larger." The technical innovation represented by the variable emission technique demonstrates a recurring pattern in military history, how individual initiative and practical problem-solving often lead to significant advances that formal research and development processes might not have produced as quickly or effectively. Captain Wilkinson, who had supported Hartley's innovation rather than punishing his unauthorized modification, received the Navy Cross for his leadership during the July 15th engagement and subsequent operations. In his memoir, published in 1968, he reflected on the leadership lesson he had learned. Military organizations necessarily operate according to strict protocols and hierarchies, but wise commanders recognize when to embrace unexpected innovations from unexpected sources. Hartley's modification reminded me that good ideas can come from anywhere in the chain of command. For the men who sailed aboard American destroyers in the Solomon Islands during that pivotal summer of 1943, the immediate impact was measured in successful engagements. Ships returned safely to harbor, and comrades who survived because Japanese forces were increasingly outmatched in the electronic domain of warfare. Radar operator Michael Donovan of the USS Nicholas expressed it simply in his wartime journal. Before Hartley's trick, every night patrol was a nerve-wracking game of cat and mouse, where sometimes we were the cat and sometimes the mouse. After the new radar technique, we became the cat that the mouse never sees coming. The broader significance of this technological turning point extends beyond its immediate tactical impact. It illustrates how warfare often advances through a complex interplay of technology, individual initiative, and institutional adaptation. The Japanese Navy's initial advantage in night operations, built on superior night optics and tactical doctrine, was neutralized not by a revolutionary new technology, but by an innovative application of existing technology. Thomas Hartley returned to Pennsylvania after the war, completing his electrical engineering degree under the GI Bill before founding a company that specialized in radio frequency engineering. Hartley Communications eventually became a significant defense contractor, developing electronic warfare systems that incorporated the principles he had first explored in that cramped radar room aboard the USS O'Bannon. In 1973, during the dedication of a new wing at the Naval Electronics Laboratory in San Diego, Hartley delivered remarks that captured the philosophy behind his wartime innovation. The most powerful technological advantages often come not from entirely new systems, but from using existing technology in unexpected ways. Our adversaries prepare for what they expect us to do. True advantage comes from doing what they don't expect, with tools they thought they understood. The story of how Japanese ships disappeared from their own detection systems while remaining visible to American radar represents more than a technical footnote in naval history. It demonstrates how individual initiative, technical knowledge, and operational necessity combined to create a capability that altered the strategic balance in the Pacific theater. For modern naval forces, the lesson remains relevant. As electromagnetic spectrum operations become increasingly sophisticated, the principles first demonstrated by Hartley's simple modification, unpredictability, variation, and adaptation, remain fundamental aspects of electronic warfare doctrine. The young radio man who dared to modify his equipment against regulations could hardly have imagined the strategic impact of his innovation or how it would influence naval operations for decades to come. Yet his story reminds us that in warfare, as in many human endeavors, transformative changes often begin with a single individual asking a simple question: what if we tried something different? And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.